If you believe the quietest moments often hold the deepest truths, make sure to like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. It started like any other dreary afternoon in the Ridgeway Memorial Hospital ER waiting room, where fluorescent lights flickered half-heartedly and the hum of machines mixed with the low murmur of restless visitors. People drifted in and out, families weighed down by worry, patients with eyes glazed over from exhaustion or pain, nurses exchanging hurried glances that barely registered the human lives passing by. But in the far corner, where no one paid attention, sat Amy Delgado, 28 years old, with hands as steady and deliberate as they had been in some of the most volatile zones on the planet. She worked her crochet hook like a soldier managing equipment in a battlefield, slow, precise, almost ritualistic. Her army jacket, worn thin and patched over years of service, hung loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes, sharp yet distant, stared down at the interwoven yarn, as if each loop tethered her to something far beyond that sterile waiting room. Nobody knew her, and nobody asked. To the casual observer, Amy was just another young woman filling time, her presence a quiet oddity in a place defined by urgency. Some whispered behind her back, amused by the anachronism of a veteran so young, so seemingly out of place, methodically crafting blankets where medical charts and worried faces should have taken precedence. She wasn't smiling, wasn't grimacing. She just moved, hands dancing over the skeins of thread, as if the weight of her past was woven into every knot, each loop binding her further to silence. The nurses called it harmless eccentricity, a coping mechanism for someone struggling to find purpose in civilian life. Just a young girl lost in memories, one nurse had remarked as she pulled the curtain shut on another patient's bed, eyes rolling with polite disinterest. But they didn't see the scars beneath Amy's calm, the medals no one asked about, the clearance levels buried under classified redactions, the endless nights spent watching, waiting, surviving when no one was watching. What they didn't know was that she carried an alias far older and far heavier than her years suggested, Iron Rose, a code name from a time spent in covert special operations, when a single misstep could mean death, not dismissal. Her hands hadn't learned patience to waste it on idle stitches. They had been trained to work with purpose, to disarm explosives, decrypt secret codes, manage life or death communications under fire. And now, in this antiseptic waiting room, they created something far less explosive but far more telling, a patchwork of resilience. She wasn't there for herself. Amy wasn't there because of pain. She wasn't there because of boredom. She was there for him, a patient whose name was listed but whose story was buried in redacted folders. An old veteran, retired for years, whose arrival had gone unnoticed by most of the hospital staff. He sat in the next row, a stooped figure holding on to life by a thread thinner than his hospital gown. His eyes closed, face pale, a shadow of a man who'd once walked through fire and come out alive, but now seemed destined to fade quietly into obscurity. The whispers started early. "Why not crochet at home?" one nurse had muttered, her voice loud enough for nearby patients to hear. "Doesn't look like she's in a rush." A few of the other visitors chuckled. An old man in the adjacent chair shifted uncomfortably, eyes flickering toward Amy but looking away when their gazes met. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just sat, as though trying not to remember. But something was stirring beneath the surface. A quiet tension, a slow crescendo that no one acknowledged yet somehow felt. Amy's fingers never paused. Her gaze remained fixed, not on the hospital lights above, not on the murmuring families around her, but on the faint glimmer of something unseen, something waiting. And then, a faint sound broke through the haze, sharp and deliberate. The clicking of the hospital's front door as it opened, footsteps approaching steadily. Dr. Nathan Mercer, a man whose reputation in military medicine preceded him, stepped into the waiting room with the quiet authority of someone used to making life and death decisions without a second thought. His eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable, but when they landed on Amy, they didn't blink. "Iron Rose, Alpha Response," he said, his voice cutting clean through the background noise like a blade. The words weren't a question. They were a summons. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The whispered jokes stopped mid-sentence. The nurses glanced up, uncertain. Even the old man in the adjacent chair shifted, his grip tightening on the edge of his seat. Amy's crochet hook froze halfway through the next loop. Her eyes lifted slowly, deliberately, and met Dr. Mercer's gaze, calm, unwavering, full of a knowledge that none around her dared grasp. She didn't smile. She didn't protest. She stood, her movements measured and precise, folding the half-finished blanket into a neat square. The crowd watched, confused but unable to look away, as if witnessing a quiet war unfold in real time. The doctor gestured toward the hospital entrance. No explanations given, no permissions asked. She simply walked, step by deliberate step, toward the unknown. The waiting room, once a place of indifference, now seemed impossibly still. And in the quiet aftermath, an unseen door finally creaked open. Inside a locked shadow box in the hospital's back office, sealed for decades since 1972, someone had finally pried the latch. Within it lay metals no one in that building had ever seen, each more obscure and classified than the last. Alongside them was a letter, carefully folded, its paper yellowed with age, signed by a general whose name echoed in whispers among those few who knew of such things. The letter didn't explain. It didn't boast. It merely acknowledged duty. Iron Rose. Alpha response. Your service is not forgotten. And as the hospital lights flickered overhead, Amy Delgado walked into her next mission, leaving behind nothing but the faint imprint of silence and inevitability. The hospital's fluorescent hum seemed to fade, swallowed by a silence that tightened like a noose around every soul in the waiting room. Nobody spoke. No one dared. The weight of that single call, Iron Rose, Alpha response, hung in the air like a verdict already delivered. Amy Delgado moved with a quiet precision, each step measured, as if retracing a path drilled into muscle memory over years of classified operations. She didn't glance back at the murmuring crowd or the nurses who now watched with a mix of curiosity, fear, and confusion. Her face remained unreadable, a canvas of control born from discipline rather than choice. As Dr. Nathan Mercer led her through sterile hallways toward the back of the ER, the low murmur of voices dissolved into an unsettling hush. The fluorescent lights above cast cold, impersonal shadows over their path, but Amy's eyes remained sharp, focused ahead, unwavering in their purpose. Every step she took seemed to reverberate louder than the last, as if each echo marked her return to duty. The old man in the next row of chairs, the patient whose name was buried deep in hospital records, lay motionless, his presence no longer incidental, but central to an unfolding story no one else yet understood. The nurse who had scoffed at Amy's crochet hook now stood stiff, arms crossed, her eyes flickering toward the door as if bracing for judgment. Dr. Mercer paused briefly, then spoke with deliberate calm. We've already run preliminary diagnostics, but none of the standard protocols apply here, he said, his tone clipped but respectful. His medical record is sealed, classified. His gaze remained locked on Amy, waiting. She nodded slowly, folding the blanket into an exact square. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat, the last touch of something tender before her resolve hardened. Then we bypassed them, she replied. Her voice was even, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more than most would live to understand. The door to the ICU swung open without ceremony. The sterile room beyond was dim, the soft beeping of machines and the low hiss of oxygen blending into a mechanical lullaby. A team of doctors and nurses stood aside, their faces pale and uncertain, as if the weight of what was about to happen exceeded their training. At the center of the room lay the patient, unconscious, pale, connected to a web of tubes and monitors. His chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath a testament to the thin thread of life still holding him. His identity remained locked behind layers of bureaucracy, but to Amy, he was no mystery. Dr. Mercer gestured toward the control panel. System won't accept override without proper authorization, he said. But that's why you're here. Amy's hand moved to the small black device clipped to her belt, the one she never removed. A relic of her time in special ops, it was programmed for access codes no civilian system was meant to know. She typed with the steady fingers of someone trained to act when hesitation meant death. I am authorized, she said softly but firmly, as if speaking the words aloud somehow made them true. The machine beeped once, twice, and then relented, opening access to the patient's encrypted medical history. A slow stream of data began to pour onto the screen, redacted sections glowing faintly like secrets about to be unearthed. Amy's eyes flicked over the screen, absorbing the encrypted history of a man who had once stood in her position. Combat medic, special operator, someone whose identity was erased by classified operations and political expediency. The diagnosis was clear now. Internal hemorrhaging. The exact pattern of trauma matched something far too specific to be random. Gunshot wounds, shrapnel embedded near vital arteries. Dr. Mercer watched, waiting, knowing that Amy's next move would either save a life or prove futile. She worked swiftly, inputting the precise stabilization protocols only someone with her level of clearance could administer. Her fingers moved again, overriding the standard triage procedures, rerouting power, unlocking locked compartments containing specialized emergency medical tools reserved for battlefield use. She wasn't a doctor in this moment. She was a warrior, using field-honed skills to wrest a man back from the brink. The team around her stepped back instinctively, some in awe, others in fear, but none interfered. Even the nurses who had dismissed her presence before now watched in stunned silence. The same nurses who whispered, "What a waste of time," now held their breath as she worked with an authority no civilian credential could confer. As the minutes ticked by, monitors beeped steadily, the patient's vitals stabilizing, his chest rising more fully. The faintest color returned to his cheeks, a ghost of life breathing back into a body on borrowed time. Amy finally stepped back, folding her arms with the same exacting precision that had carried her through countless operations. Dr. Mercer exhaled deeply, the tension in his shoulders visibly loosening. "Well done," he said, his voice low but sincere, without embellishment. "He'll make it through." But Amy didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge praise or gratitude. Instead, her eyes drifted to the sealed envelope she had carried since arriving. A worn, classified letter signed by the general who once entrusted her with lives she'd saved and secrets she'd never reveal. Behind them, the old man shifted slightly, his eyes fluttering open for the first time since his arrival. His gaze, though weak, locked on Amy's face. Recognition passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of duty fulfilled. Outside the room, the waiting area remained oblivious, save for the subtle shift in atmosphere. Whispers began to spread, slower now, touched with something unfamiliar. Curiosity, reverence, the realization that Amy Delgado was not some lost civilian, but a sentinel whose quiet defiance had answered a call no one else dared hear. And somewhere, deep within the hospital's locked archives, the shadow box creaked once more, the unopened metals waiting patiently for the next hand to trace their story. The minutes that followed felt suspended in time, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for what should come next. The old man's eyes, still heavy with exhaustion, now sharpened with clarity as he looked at Amy Delgado. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Her presence alone carried the weight of shared history, a bond forged in silence, in unspoken duty, and in lives saved beyond the public eye. Dr. Nathan Mercer remained a few steps behind her, watching the man's breathing stabilize, each inhale less labored, each exhale a little more whole. He knew better than to say the wrong thing. Instead, he let the quiet speak. The room seemed to listen. The machines beeped steadily, counting time not in urgency, but in persistence. Amy stood still, her gaze unwavering, as if trying to memorize every detail of that fragile moment. The way the old man's chest rose and fell, the faint twitch of his fingers, the glimmer of recognition in his eyes. She didn't need to speak. She didn't want to explain. The crowd that had once dismissed her presence was gone. All that remained was truth. A soft knock sounded at the ICU's entrance. The door opened slowly, and in walked Colonel Marcus Wainwright, a man whose reputation in the military was whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear. His presence wasn't marked by medals or loud declarations. It was in the way his uniform hung perfectly on his frame, in the quiet confidence of his steps. His eyes locked immediately on Amy, then the patient. "Iron Rose," he said, voice steady but layered with emotion. "Alpha response acknowledges receipt." He didn't pause for a response. None was expected. The name wasn't a title. It was a legacy. The old man stirred again, his eyes now fully open. Recognition dawned fully in his gaze. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out, his hand trembling, and touched Amy's. A simple gesture, but one laden with decades of unspoken service. His voice, cracked but clear, broke the silence. "Thank you for not forgetting." Amy didn't smile. Her hand remained steady beneath his, a steady anchor. The weight of words was unnecessary. She had only done what was required. Outside the ICU, whispers transformed into quiet discussions, murmurs of a veteran who hadn't sought praise but had answered the call when no one else would. The nurses who had once laughed at her crochet now exchanged glances of respect, as if trying to reconcile the girl they saw with the warrior they hadn't known. Colonel Wainwright stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the patient's face. "His name is Samuel Travers," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Combat medic, long retired, one of us." The name carried a weight, though few in the hospital heard it. Amy Delgado's eyes flickered briefly, a small nod acknowledging the connection. She didn't need to elaborate. The past and present now stood side by side, woven together as seamlessly as the blanket she had begun in silence. The patient's breathing steadied further, monitors displaying stable vitals, as though time itself recognized the magnitude of what had occurred. The hospital, once indifferent, had shifted. The sterile waiting room, the clinical detachment of doctors and nurses, the unfeeling fluorescent lights, all had been transformed by a quiet act of courage. Later that afternoon, after the initial urgency had passed and the staff returned to their routine, the atmosphere remained changed. Amy Delgado sat once again in the waiting room, quietly crocheting the same blanket, now finished and folded neatly beside her. But this time, her presence no longer drew whispers of pity or mockery. Instead, there were respectful nods, quiet acknowledgments, and tentative smiles from those who now saw her differently. Dr. Mercer approached carefully, offering a small nod of thanks. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly, almost as if afraid to disturb the fragile truth of the moment. Amy looked up briefly, her eyes calm. "I did," she replied simply. Colonel Wainwright, standing a few steps away, watched without interrupting, his own expression unreadable. He didn't need to say anything. The recognition was already there, in the way Amy carried herself, in the gentle precision of her movements, and in the steady gaze that never faltered. Days later, a bronze plaque was installed quietly near the hospital's main entrance. Not a grand ceremony, no press conferences, no televised announcements. Just a small marker, etched in simple, unassuming script. In honor of Samuel Travers, combat medic, silent guardian of life. Beneath the plaque, another name followed in smaller text. Iron Rose, Alpha Response, Amy Delgado. Neither of them asked for recognition. Neither had sought applause. Their legacy was not measured in headlines or medals, but in lives preserved, in moments when no one else dared to act. And somewhere, in the back office of Ridgeway Memorial Hospital, the shadow box sat unlocked for the first time in decades. The metals inside gleamed faintly under dim light, alongside a yellowed letter signed by a general. It no longer symbolized secrecy or forgotten duty. Instead, it stood as a quiet testament to resilience and unsung valor. Because courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply sits, quietly crocheting blankets in the waiting room, waiting for the right moment to remind the world who it serves. The legacy didn't fade. It was passed, silent but steady, from one hand to the next.